The Arizona desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a landscape of sand, scrub brush, and rock formations that looked like ancient monuments to desolation. Chief Petty Officer Hunter Briggs moved through the terrain with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years in naval special warfare, his movements economical and silent despite the 40 pounds of gear he carried. The sun was setting behind the Babokivari Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Hunter had time to appreciate them. He didn't. He was 3 miles into what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance operation along the border, gathering intelligence on suspected cartel trafficking routes that Homeland Security had flagged as high priority. Overwatch, this is Shadow 1. Hunter spoke quietly into his throat mic. Approaching checkpoint Echo. No activity observed. Copy, Shadow 1, came the response from his handler back at the forward operating base. Be advised, Border Patrol has units active in your sector. They've been notified of your presence. Understood, Hunter replied, though a small knot of concern formed in his gut. Interagency operations were always tricky. Too many moving parts, too many communication channels, too many opportunities for things to go sideways. He'd been working this sector for 3 weeks, part of a joint task force operation targeting a particularly sophisticated smuggling network. The cartels had evolved, using drones, encrypted communications, and counter-surveillance techniques that rivaled military operations, which was why they'd called in naval special warfare. Sometimes you needed people trained to hunt other trained people. Hunter paused behind a cluster of rocks, pulling out his binoculars to scan the valley ahead. Nothing moved except a hawk circling lazily overhead. The air was cooling rapidly now that the sun was down, the desert's way of reminding you that extremes were its specialty. His radio crackled with static, then cleared. Shadow 1, Overwatch. We're getting reports of armed suspects in your area. Can you confirm? Hunter scanned again, more carefully this time. Negative. No visual on armed suspects. Area appears clear. But even as he said it, he felt the familiar tingle at the base of his skull, the instinct that had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments. Something was off. The desert was too quiet, the air too still. He moved forward, staying low, using the terrain for cover. His rifle was up, finger alongside the trigger guard, eyes constantly scanning. This was the kind of situation that could go from 0 to lethal in seconds. What Hunter didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that 7 miles away, a communication error was unfolding that would change the next hour of his life. Border Patrol agent Eli Morrison had been working the Arizona sector for 6 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. Smugglers, coyotes, leading desperate migrants, drug mules, even the occasional lost tourist who'd wandered too far from civilization. But tonight's dispatch had his attention focused. All units be advised, the radio crackled. Armed suspect reported in Sector 7, approximately 3 miles east of Checkpoint Echo. Suspect is described as military-aged male, carrying tactical gear and weapons. Approach with extreme caution. Eli exchanged glances with his partner, Agent Dylan Torres, who was driving their patrol vehicle along the rough desert road. That's our sector, Dylan said unnecessarily. Yeah, Eli replied, his hand moving to check his sidearm. Could be cartel scouts. They've been getting bolder. In the back of the vehicle, secured in his specially designed K9 compartment, Eli's partner Luke sat alert and focused. The Belgian Malinois was 4 years old, certified in patrol work, narcotics detection, and suspect apprehension. He was also one of the best K9s in the entire Border Patrol sector, smart, driven, and absolutely fearless when the situation demanded it. What Eli didn't know was that the dispatch had garbled the information. The original message from the task force had been clear. Friendly operator in Sector 7, please maintain distance and avoid contact. But somewhere in the chain of communication, a new dispatcher, an overloaded radio channel, or just simple human error, the message had been corrupted. Friendly operator had become armed suspect. 30 minutes later, Dillon brought the vehicle to a stop on a ridgeline overlooking the valley where Hunter was conducting his reconnaissance. Through their night vision equipment, they could see a figure moving through the terrain, tactical gear, weapon, moving with obvious training and purpose. "That's him," Dillon said. "Fits the description." Eli watched through his binoculars, something nagging at his instincts. The person moved like a professional, too professional. Not the sloppy, paranoid movements of cartel scouts, but the deliberate, practiced efficiency of someone with serious training. "Something feels wrong," Eli said. "That doesn't move like any cartel guy I've ever seen." "Could be ex-military," Dillon suggested. "Cartels recruit them sometimes, big money." Eli keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Border 7. We have visual on the suspect. Requesting confirmation. Do we have any friendly operations in this sector?" Static. Then, negative Border 7, sector is clear of authorized personnel. Proceed with caution. That should have been enough. But Eli's instincts were still screaming that something wasn't right. "We should call this in to CBP leadership. Get confirmation before we—" His radio erupted with multiple voices. "Shots fired, shots fired. All units respond to—" The transmission cut off into static. "That's less than a mile from here," Dillon said, already putting the vehicle in gear. "We need to move." The shots, fired by a different patrol encountering actual cartel members, added urgency and chaos to an already confused situation. Eli made a decision that seemed right at the moment, but would haunt him minutes later. "Let's detain the suspect for questioning," he said. "If he's friendly, we'll sort it out. If he's hostile, we've stopped a threat." They approached Hunter's position from two directions using standard tactical procedures. When they were within 50 yards, Dillon activated the vehicle's spotlight, flooding the area with harsh white light. "Armed suspect, show your hands! This is Border Patrol!" Dillon's voice boomed through the vehicle's PA system. Hunter, caught in the spotlight, immediately raised his hands, his rifle dangling from its sling. His training kicked in. "Don't escalate. Identify yourself clearly. Trust that the communication breakdown would be resolved quickly." "Federal agent," Hunter called out. "I'm a U.S. Navy SEAL on authorized operation. Check with your dispatch." But in the chaos of the moment, shots fired elsewhere. An armed person where dispatch said there shouldn't be friendlies. Adrenaline overriding careful thought. Eli made another decision. "Keep your hands visible. Get on the ground. Now!" Eli commanded, exiting the vehicle with his weapon drawn. Hunter complied, recognizing a bad situation getting worse. He lay prone, hands extended, using his calmest voice. "I'm telling you, I'm U.S. military. There's been a communication error. My call sign is Shadow 1. Contact task force operations at—" "Shut up!" Dillon snapped, approaching from the other side. "We'll sort out who you are after we secure the scene." Luke was barking from inside the vehicle, not the excited bark of a pet, but the focused, aggressive sound of a working dog, sensing tension and preparing to engage. Eli moved toward the vehicle, his mind racing. This guy was too calm, too professional. Something was definitely wrong with this entire situation. "Dillon, hold on," Eli said. "Let me call this in before we—" That's when everything went sideways. Another unit, responding to the shots fired, came over the ridge with lights and sirens. Hunter, reacting to the sudden noise and movement, shifted position slightly to look. Dillon, his nerves wound tight, interpreted the movement as aggression. "He's going for his weapon," Dillon shouted, incorrectly but genuinely believing it in the moment, and Eli, operating on training and instinct and the split-second decisions that define law enforcement, made the call. "Luke, Fass!" The German command for attack. "Get him!" Eli released Luke from the vehicle, and the Belgian Malinois exploded into motion with the kind of speed and power that made him effective at his job. 70 pounds of muscle, teeth, and training-honed aggression launched across the 30 feet, separating him from Hunter with singular focus. Hunter saw the dog coming, and his own training kicked in. Protect your throat and major arteries. Try to present your forearm for the bite. Minimize damage until you can control the situation. He'd been through canine attack training, knew exactly how much damage a police dog could inflict. Luke closed the distance in seconds, his bark transitioning into the focused silence of a dog committed to the attack. 20 feet, 15, 10. Then something extraordinary happened. Luke stopped, not gradually, not with hesitation, but with the abruptness of a dog who'd just recognized something that overrode every bit of his training. His aggressive posture melted away, ears coming up from their laid-back position, tail shifting from tucked to neutral, his entire body language transforming from threat to neutralize to something important here. "Luke! Fass!" Eli commanded again, confused by his partner's sudden hesitation. "Get him!" But Luke didn't attack. Instead, he approached Hunter differently, cautiously, but without aggression, his nose working overtime, his entire focus on the prone man. When he reached Hunter, the dog did something that made Eli's blood run cold. Luke lay down in front of Hunter, head on his paws, in the absolute submission posture that dogs reserve for showing respect and deference to someone they recognize as important. "What the hell?" Dylan whispered. Hunter, still prone with his hands visible, spoke quietly. "Easy, boy. I know you. I remember you." And then Hunter said something that made Eli's world tilt. "Mosul, 2019. You were just a puppy." Luke's tail began to wag, not the aggressive, tense movement of a working dog on alert, but the genuine, full-body wag of recognition and joy. The dog moved closer, pressing his head against Hunter's shoulder in a gesture that was unmistakably affectionate. "Hold on," Eli said, his weapon still drawn, but his finger now alongside the trigger guard, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" Hunter, still not moving, keeping everything slow and non-threatening, said calmly, "I was part of a humanitarian mission in Mosul, Iraq, in 2019. We were clearing buildings after ISIS pulled out, found a litter of puppies in the rubble of a bombed house. Mom had been killed, 4 puppies barely old enough to survive. We got them out, brought them to a military working dog trainer who was assessing local dogs for potential service work." He paused, letting Luke nuzzle his face. "This one was special. We called him Lucky because he was the runt, shouldn't have made it, but had more heart than all the others combined. I spent 3 days feeding him with a bottle before we could transport them all to the training facility in Jordan." Eli's hand moved to his radio, his instincts now screaming that they'd made a terrible mistake. "Dispatch, Border 7. Stand by. I need immediate confirmation on—" The radio crackled to life before he could finish. "All units. All units. Disregard previous advisory. Armed suspect report was in error. Be advised, we have a U.S. Navy SEAL operating in Sector 7 under Joint Task Force authorization. Call sign Shadow 1. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." The silence that followed was profound and awful. "Jesus Christ," Dylan said, holstering his weapon. "We almost—" "Sir," Eli said, moving forward slowly, his own weapon now holstered. "I need you to know that was a communication error. We were told—" "I know," Hunter said, finally moving to sit up slowly. Luke immediately pressed against him, tail still wagging. "These things happen in joint operations. Nobody's fault, just bad information at the wrong time." But Eli could see the tension in Hunter's shoulders, the careful way he moved, the recognition that if Luke had followed orders, this would have ended very differently. A canine bite wasn't just painful. It could cause serious injury, and in the confusion, things could have escalated to lethal force. "Your dog saved both our asses," Hunter said quietly. his hand now running over Luke's head in a gesture that was clearly familiar to the animal. "If he'd attacked like he was trained to, I would have defended myself. Someone would have gotten hurt, maybe killed, all over a communication error." Dylan was on his radio now, calling in the situation, requesting that command be notified, trying to unfuck what had almost become a catastrophic incident. Eli knelt down beside Luke, his mind still processing what he'd witnessed. "You really remember him? After 5 years?" "Dogs don't forget," Hunter said. "Especially not the people who saved their lives when they were most vulnerable." He looked at Luke, and the Malinois looked back, with what could only be described as devotion. "And I don't forget them either. I followed up on that litter. 3 of the 4 made it through training. 1 went to military working dog service in Afghanistan. 1 went to Secret Service. And this one came to Border Patrol," Eli finished. "He's been my partner for 3 years, best K9 I've ever worked with." Hunter scratched behind Luke's ears in a specific spot that made the dog's back leg kick slightly, an involuntary response that made Hunter smile. That spot was his weakness even when he was a puppy, used to calm him down when he was anxious about feeding time. The memory came back to Hunter with crystal clarity, triggered by the feel of Luke's fur under his fingers and the weight of the dog's head against his chest. Mosul, Iraq, had been hell on earth in 2017. By 2019, when Hunter's team had arrived for post-conflict humanitarian assessment, it was a hell that had burned itself out, leaving only ashes and trauma. The city was a moonscape of destruction. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, buildings collapsed into themselves, the infrastructure shattered beyond recognition. Hunter's SEAL team had been attached to a UN humanitarian mission, not their usual work, but the kind of thing that happened when you needed security in places where violence could erupt without warning. Their job was to secure sites, assess safety, and occasionally help with search and rescue in areas too dangerous for civilian teams. They'd been clearing a residential block in the old city, checking buildings for structural stability and unexploded ordnance, when Hunter had heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the death and silence of that destroyed neighborhood. A whimpering, high-pitched and desperate. "Hold up," Hunter had said to his team. "You hear that?" They'd followed the sound to what had been a 3-story house, now mostly collapsed. The whimpering was coming from a space beneath a partially intact stairwell, a pocket of survival in the surrounding destruction. It had taken 30 minutes of careful digging, moving rubble piece by piece, aware that the entire structure could collapse further at any moment. When they finally created an opening large enough to reach through, Hunter had shined his flashlight into the space. 4 puppies, maybe 6 weeks old, huddled together in what appeared to be a plastic storage container that had protected them from the worst of the collapse. Their mother, a German Shepherd mix, lay beside them, dead for at least a day, judging by the condition of the body. The puppies were dehydrated, starving, and covered in dust, but alive. "We can't just leave them," Hunter had said, knowing that his team would give him grief for it. "We're not supposed to bring back souvenirs, Chief," one of his teammates had joked, but he was already helping pull the puppies out carefully. They'd carried the puppies back to their base in a cardboard box, and Hunter had spent that entire night trying to keep them alive. 3 of them had been responsive, drinking water, and eventually accepting formula that the base medic had scrounged up. But the 4th, the smallest, the runt, had been listless and weak, barely responsive. Hunter had refused to let that puppy die. He'd used a syringe to give it water drop by drop, had wrapped it in his own shirt to keep it warm, had sat up through his entire sleep shift, making sure it kept breathing. By morning, the puppy, Lucky, as Hunter had started calling him, had rallied, weak but fighting, with the determination that seemed outsized for something so small and vulnerable. A military working dog trainer named Violet Chen, who was in Mosul assessing local dogs for potential service work, had evaluated the puppies the next day. 3 of these have potential, she'd said, good structure, right temperament markers. But this little one, she'd held up Lucky. He's probably not going to make it through training. Too small, too weak. That one's a fighter, Hunter had insisted. He's got more heart than the others combined. Violet had smiled. Heart's good, but it doesn't change size and strength requirements. But I'll take him anyway. Maybe he'll surprise us. Hunter had spent 3 more days with the puppies before they were transported to a training facility in Jordan. 3 days of bottle feeding, of cleaning them, of watching them grow stronger. He'd been particularly attached to Lucky, the puppy who'd refused to give up even when survival seemed impossible. "You're going to do great things," Hunter had whispered to Lucky on the last night, the puppy asleep in his lap. "You're tougher than you look." He'd gotten updates occasionally. The puppies had made it to training, 3 had been certified, 1 had washed out of military work, but had been adopted as a family pet. He'd lost track of which specific dogs went where, the demands of his job and subsequent deployments pushing those memories into the background. But he'd never forgotten. And clearly, neither had Lucky. Back in the present, on the Arizona desert floor, Hunter sat with Luke pressed against his side while Eli made phone calls and Dylan coordinated with the other units to stand down from high alert. The shots they'd heard had been another Border Patrol unit engaging with actual cartel scouts, a situation now resolved with 2 suspects in custody and no injuries. "I need to know something," Eli said, ending his call and turning to Hunter. "You said you were there for 3 days. That's it, 3 days, 5 years ago, and he remembered you instantly. How is that possible?" Hunter considered the question, his hand still absently scratching Luke's ears. "Dogs' brains work differently than ours. Their memory is tied heavily to scent and emotion. To us, 3 days might not seem like much. But to a 6-week-old puppy who was starving and terrified, those 3 days were everything. I was the source of food, warmth, safety, all the things that matter most when you're that young and vulnerable." He paused, watching Luke's eyes half close in contentment. "Plus, military working dogs and police K9s are selected specifically for their intelligence and memory. They have to remember complex training, remember specific scents, remember patterns and procedures. That same trait that makes them excellent working dogs means they don't forget significant people or events." "But to override his training like that," Dylan said, still clearly shaken by what had happened, "he's trained to attack on command. Period. It's supposed to be absolute." "Training is powerful," Hunter agreed, "but it's still layered on top of deeper instincts and emotional bonds. What you witnessed was the conflict between learned behavior and profound recognition. His training told him to attack. But some deeper part of his brain, the part that remembered being saved, being cared for, being protected, recognized me and said, 'This is not a threat. This is safety.'" Eli sat down beside his partner, his hand joining Hunter's in petting the dog. "I've worked with Luke for 3 years. I've never seen him disobey a command, not once. He's been in dozens of high-stress situations, and he's always been absolutely reliable." "He still is reliable," Hunter said. "He just proved that his judgment is even better than his training. Think about it. If he'd attacked me, this situation would have turned into a nightmare. I would have defended myself against what I perceived as an attack. You would have escalated in response. Best case scenario, your dog gets hurt and I get arrested despite being in the right. Worst case, someone dies." The weight of that settled over them. Dylan sat down heavily on a rock. "Communication errors happen. We train for them, try to minimize them, but they happen. But usually there's no safety net. Usually when things go wrong, they go really wrong." "Luke was your safety net tonight," Hunter said. "His memory and his judgment prevented a tragedy." A vehicle approached, the task force commander arriving to personally apologize and debrief the incident. There would be paperwork, incident reports, reviews of communication protocols. The machinery of bureaucracy grinding away to prevent this from happening again. But right now, in this moment, there was just a man and a dog who remembered each other across years and miles and circumstances. A bond formed in the rubble of a war zone, maintained through nothing more than the perfect memory of a species that evolved alongside humans, that learned to read us and remember us better than we remember ourselves. "Can I ask you something?" Eli said quietly. "When you saved those puppies in Mosul, was that part of your mission?" Hunter smiled slightly. "No, it was completely outside our operational parameters. I actually got chewed out by my commander for wasting time and resources on animals when we had human priorities. But I couldn't just leave them there. They didn't ask to be born in a war zone. They didn't choose to have their mother killed. They were just innocent. And I had the power to help, so I did. And tonight, that decision saved lives," Dylan said. "There's something poetic about that." "There's something honest about it," Hunter corrected. "We like to think we're separate from animals, that we're more evolved or sophisticated. But the truth is, they understand loyalty and gratitude and memory in ways that are purer than what we manage most of the time." Luke didn't stop his attack because of complex reasoning. He stopped because his heart recognized something his training couldn't override. Luke, as if understanding he was being discussed, lifted his head and looked at Hunter with those intelligent brown eyes. Then he did something that made Eli's throat tighten. He placed his paw on Hunter's hand, the same gesture he used with Eli when seeking comfort or offering reassurance. "He thinks you're Pack," Eli said softly. "Even after all this time, even after everything, he recognizes you as Pack." "Maybe we never stopped being Pack," Hunter said. "Maybe that's what tonight was about, not just recognition, but reunion, the universe bringing back together two souls that were meant to be connected." The task force commander arrived, and the formal debrief began. Hunter would have to file reports, Eli and Dylan would face review for the communication breakdown, and protocols would be examined and probably revised. The incident would become a case study in how quickly things could go wrong, and how important clear communication was in joint operations. But it would also become something else, a story about loyalty that transcended training, memory that survived years and miles, and the profound connections that could form between humans and animals in moments of crisis. 6 months later, Hunter attended a K-9 award ceremony in Tucson, where Luke received recognition for his years of exceptional service with Border Patrol. During the ceremony, Eli told the story of the night Luke had disobeyed orders, explaining how that disobedience had prevented a tragedy. "We train our K-9s to be obedient, to follow commands without hesitation," Eli said to the assembled crowd of law enforcement and their families. "But we also select them for intelligence, for judgment, for the ability to assess situations and make decisions." That night, Luke showed us that sometimes the highest form of service is knowing when not to follow orders. After the ceremony, Hunter spent time with Luke, watching the dog work through his paces with Eli, seeing how seamlessly they operated as a team. The bond between handler and K-9 was obvious, built on years of daily work and trust. "Does it ever bother you?" Hunter asked Eli, "knowing that he has this connection with someone else?" Eli thought about the question carefully. "At first, maybe a little. I thought I was his whole world, you know. But then I realized having more people to love doesn't diminish the love he has for me. If anything, it proves what an extraordinary dog he is. His capacity for loyalty and memory and love is bigger than most humans can manage." Hunter knelt down, and Luke came to him immediately, pressing his head into Hunter's chest the same way he had that night in the desert. "You did good, Lucky," Hunter whispered. "You grew up to be exactly what I knew you would be. Strong, brave, and true." Luke's tail wagged, and for a moment Hunter could see the scared, starving puppy he'd bottle-fed in the ruins of Mosul. But that puppy had grown into this, a dog who served his community, who protected his handler, who'd shown judgment and character in a crisis. "They say dogs don't have souls," Eli said, watching the reunion. They say they're just animals, operating on instinct and training. But anyone who believes that has never looked into the eyes of a dog like Luke and seen what's looking back. Hunter stood, his hand one last time on Luke's head. They have souls. Different from ours, maybe, but no less real. And they remember. God, do they remember? Every kindness, every cruelty, every moment when we were there for them or failed them. They remember it all, and they never stop believing that the people who saved them once might save them again. As Hunter drove away from the ceremony, heading back to his base and his next mission, he thought about the chain of events that had started in the ruins of Mosul and led to that night in the Arizona desert. How a decision to save 4 puppies, a decision that violated protocol and wasted operational time, had ultimately prevented a tragedy years later. We never know which of our actions will matter most, he reflected. We make choices every day, to help or walk away, to show kindness or indifference, to see the value in lives different from our own. And sometimes, years later, those choices come back to us in ways we never expected. Luke hadn't just saved Hunter that night. He'd saved himself, saved Eli and Dylan from making a tragic mistake, saved everyone from the aftermath of a preventable tragedy, and he'd done it not because of training or commands, but because of something deeper, a memory of kindness in a time of desperation, and a loyalty that transcended every rule and regulation. That, Hunter thought, was worth more than all the tactical training and advanced equipment in the world. Because in the end, what saved us wasn't the technology or the weapons or the protocols. It was the bonds we formed, the kindness we showed, and the memories we created that whispered to us, even years later, even in the darkest moments, that we were not alone, that we were recognized, that we were remembered, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.